Swadika, hi, this is Kirpe at IEP House. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the IELTS speaking section, particularly what questions you can and cannot ask the examiner during the interview. So many of my students have asked me what they can ask in part 1, part 2, and part 3. In this video, I'm going to give you all the answers to those questions. I'm going to have some sample questions on the screen for you to see as I'm speaking. First, let's take a look at some sample questions on part 1 of the IELTS speaking test. So right here you can see that there are about 8 questions in part 1. Normally, I think the examiner is going to ask you about 10 to 12 questions in part 1 because they are very short and simple questions. These questions are all about yourself, your personal experiences, your personal stories. Basically, it's just to break the ice. In the first part, the examiner is going to try to get you to relax in the test. That is to your advantage, so please relax and do your best here. Don't worry about anything. I want you to sit back and relaxed, but not too relaxed that you think of the interview as you are talking to someone at home. Not that relaxed. Anyway, in this part 1, you can see that the first section here talks about your hometown or village. Maybe you'll get asked about your work or school. Sometimes you get asked about your family, so it's something very familiar to you, very close to you. So you should be able to answer these questions very easily. Here we have, what kind of place is it? What's the most interesting part of your town or village? What kind of jobs do the people in your town or village do? Would you say it's a good place to live and why? In this part 1 section, you should give a good length of answers, not too short and not too long. I would recommend that you give about 2 or 3 sentences as your answer. You see that the words in the questions are very simple. There are the words that you should know already. So there's not a very difficult word that I can see here, or maybe that you probably don't know the word accommodation. But in part 1, you are not allowed to ask the examiner to explain a word for you. What you can do is you can ask the examiner to repeat a question if you didn't hear it clearly. So for example, let's talk about this question. If you don't understand the word accommodation, all you can do is ask the examiner to repeat the question by saying, "Can you please repeat the question?" Or "Can you repeat the question, please?" Like that. You cannot ask the examiner to explain the word accommodation to you. That is not what they are supposed to do in part 1. So if you don't understand one of the words in the question, I'm sorry to say that you just have to figure it out on your own and try your best to answer the questions here in this part. Okay, now let's go to part 2. Right here in part 2, it is an individual long turn. That means you will have to talk about the topic right here for 1 to 2 minutes straight. The interviewer is just going to listen to you and not interrupt you for the whole 2 minutes. You will have 1 minute to think about what you are going to say, and you are going to be given a piece of paper and a pencil to make notes before you start speaking. You only have 1 minute to prepare your answer, so you have to take advantage of that 1 minute. Make notes. In part 2, the examiner is not supposed to or allowed to help you with any word in the question on the cue cards because the instructions here are self-explanatory. So you should be able to understand what you are supposed to do. Though the examiner is going to explain that, basically they are going to read to you all the things that you have to do here, but they are not going to help you with the words in the question. So you just have to look at the question and try your best to understand the question and give your answers. You have to look at the cue card here and you will see the main question at the top. In this example, it asks you to describe something that you own, which is very important to you. So you see that the words here are very simple and you should be able to understand every single word and the entire question clearly without needing to ask for help. Then you see that you should say or talk about where you got it from, how long you've had it, what you use it for, and explain why it is important to you. So you see that all the words here are very easy. That's why the examiner is not going to help explain anything to you. So you will have to answer the question and talk for 1 to 2 minutes, and I recommend that you do talk for 2 minutes to the best of your ability. Okay, now let's talk about part 3. Here in part 3, we have 3 sample questions, but on the actual speaking test or the interview, you will be asked about 5 to 6 questions, depending on how much time you have left. You wouldn't know the time, the examiner would know. So the examiner would take control of the time. So you don't have to worry about that. Just answer the questions. Your job is to answer the question as best you can. So again, let's take a look at what kind of vocabulary we will get here in this part 3 section. You will not see the questions, okay? You just have to listen to the questions asked by the examiner. So let's take a look at the first question here, for example. What kind of things give status to people in your country? In part 3, if you don't understand the word status, for example, you can ask the examiner to explain this word to you. In part 3, the examiner is allowed to help you with a word in a question. For example, the word status here. You can ask, could you please explain what status means? Or, can you tell me what the word status means? Or, excuse me, what does status mean? But if you don't understand the entire question, like the whole question just doesn't make sense to you, and you don't think that you can answer the question, what you can do is ask the examiner to repeat the question just like you could in part 1. So you can ask, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Or could you please ask again? Could you please repeat the question? Normally, when you ask the examiner to repeat the question, they will automatically rephrase or paraphrase the question for you. But again, I wouldn't recommend that you ask directly saying, could you please paraphrase the question, or could you please rephrase the question for me? That to me sounds impolite. It's more like giving a command. To me, it sounds like you are telling them what to do instead of asking them to help you. So just ask, can you please repeat the question? And they will automatically help you with that by paraphrasing or rephrasing the question for you using simpler words. Alright, so let's see. The next question here we have things changed since your parents' time? Another technique that you can use here without asking a question to the examiner is you can paraphrase the question yourself. So you can try using your own words to give your answer, and that is going to be a kind of a signal to the examiner that you are trying to make sense of the question. For example, this question here, don't copy the exact words, don't repeat the words from the question, okay? So you could say something like, do people nowadays look at things differently from the people in the past? Or you can answer directly and say, I think people now have different opinions from people in the past. Like that. So you don't have to repeat every single word. You just have to maybe use some keywords from the questions. But you have to make sure that you get the same meaning. Right? So we have one more question. Let's take a look. Do you think advertising influences what people buy? Again, if you are not sure what the word influences mean, Here you can ask the examiner by saying, can you please explain what influence means? Or what does influence mean? By the way, the word influence itself doesn't have the S. The word influence here is a verb and it has an S because of the subject, and that is a singular subject. So the verb needs to agree with the singular subject. That's why it has an S here. Right here, you can ask the examiner to explain the word influence or influences to you. Or you can again rephrase the question by saying that people are influenced by advertisements or commercials they see on TV. These advertisements affect how people choose to buy things. You can again have some keywords from the question, that's okay. You don't have to change every single word, but make sure that you don't repeat so many words from the question and that you have changed to use your own words. That way you are using synonyms and paraphrasing. It is going to help you get a good score on the vocabulary criterion. Let me recap what I've said in this video. In part 1, you can only ask the examiner to repeat a question for you. In part 2, you cannot ask the examiner to help you with anything at all. In part 3, you are allowed to ask the examiner to explain one of the words in a question or to repeat a question. I hope that clears up any doubts that you might have about what you can ask or cannot ask the examiner on the IELTS speaking test. I wish you good luck on your IELTS speaking test. Again, if you are interested in learning more about the IELTS writing or speaking tests in detail, please be subscribed to my channel and check out my other videos. Good luck with your test. Bye bye. สวัสดีค่ะ